She was sitting on the cold pavement, knees pulled tightly against her chest, a tin cup resting in her hands. The world moved quickly around her, heels clicking against concrete, voices buzzing, car horns cutting through the air. But for her, time seemed frozen. The icy wind stung her cheeks as she lifted the cup, hoping for a coin, a glance, even a shred of kindness. Then, without warning, a sleek black Bentley rolled to a slow stop in front of her. Her heart raced. She had been ignored, mocked, even spat at before. Rich men in cars like that never slowed down for someone like her. She braced herself for insults. But instead the car door opened, and a tall man stepped out. His eyes locked with hers, not with pity, but with intent. And then, in a low voice, he said something that would change the course of her life forever. He didn't know it yet, but the so-called beggar he saw before him was hiding a fortune larger than his own. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming stories. Her name was Amelia. To strangers passing by, she was just another beggar, another face on the corner of a busy street that people pretended not to see. What they couldn't know was that Amelia carried a story far heavier than the small tin cup she held out each day. The truth was, she hadn't always lived like this. Just a year before, she had a home, warmth, and laughter echoing in her life. But a series of losses had stripped all of that away. And yet, despite the cruel stares, the hunger gnawing at her stomach, and the cold nights that made her bones ache, she never lost her dignity. She always whispered thank you when someone dropped a coin in her cup. She still smiled at children, even if their parents pulled them away. Amelia's life was difficult, but behind her silence was a resilience that even poverty couldn't crush. Across the city, a very different world existed. Ethan, a man in his mid-30s, was the face of power, wealth, and influence. His name carried weight in business meetings. His photos appeared on magazine covers, and his signature could shift markets. But behind the confident smile and tailored suits was a loneliness he never admitted to anyone. Family dinners always ended with subtle reminders from his parents that he was the last unmarried son, the heir who must continue the family legacy. Business rivals whispered that his empire wasn't stable because he lacked a partner by his side. Everywhere he turned, the pressure mounted, not for more money, not for more power, but for something as simple and as complicated as love. For Ethan, the boardrooms were easy to conquer. What terrified him most was an empty home at the end of each day. And so 2 lives, Amelia's and Ethan's, moved on separate tracks, worlds apart in wealth, status, and circumstance. She needed survival, food for the night, a safe corner to rest her head. He needed a partner, someone who could silence his family, prove his rivals wrong, and perhaps ease the ache of loneliness that no fortune could fix. On the surface, their worlds were destined never to collide. And yet, fate had other plans, because Amelia's presence on that cold pavement was no accident. If she was truly just another beggar, why did she carry herself with a quiet strength, as though she were holding back a truth far larger than anyone could imagine? Why was someone with such poise living in rags? The answer lay in a secret that, if revealed, could shake both of their worlds to the core. Ethan was not a man who wasted words. When he approached Amelia on that cold street the second time, he didn't offer sympathy. Instead, he made her a proposal that left her speechless. He looked her in the eye and said, "Pretend to be my girlfriend for 1 month." Amelia almost laughed, thinking it was a cruel joke. But Ethan's expression was steady, unwavering. He needed someone who could silence his family's constant reminders, someone who could stand beside him at galas and boardrooms. To him, Amelia was a blank slate, someone unknown, someone who could play the role without bringing unwanted scandals from the past. For Amelia, the offer was shocking. A month of pretending, a month of living a life she had long left behind. Her dignity screamed to refuse, but her hunger, her exhaustion, and her unspoken reasons for being on those streets whispered otherwise. She hesitated, then whispered yes. Her transformation began almost instantly. Ethan arranged for her to be brought into his world, a tailored wardrobe, lessons in etiquette, posture, and conversation. She was taught how to hold a wine glass, how to smile just enough without seeming forced, how to sit gracefully under the judgmental gaze of high society. At first, Amelia's hands trembled each time she slipped into a gown. The mirrors reminded her of everything she had lost, and the judgment in the eyes of others cut deep. She felt like an imposter, terrified of slipping, terrified of exposing herself. Yet something about her composure puzzled Ethan. Most people in Amelia's shoes would have been overwhelmed by chandeliers, endless courses of silverware, or the elegance of ballrooms. But Amelia, though nervous, seemed to know these things too well. She sometimes corrected herself quickly, hiding knowledge of wines, artists, or traditions that no beggar should know. Ethan noticed, but said nothing. Still, every step into his world came with the risk of discovery. At a formal dinner, she almost reached for food with her hands before catching herself at the last second, cheeks burning. At another event, she bowed slightly to a matriarch out of respect, an instinct no one expected her to have. The family watched her carefully, eyes sharp, whispers soft but piercing. They couldn't understand how Ethan, with his wealth, would bring a woman from the streets into their midst. Was it rebellion? Was it desperation? Or was there something about her that even they couldn't quite place? Amelia felt their stares like knives, but she held her ground, reminding herself that this was survival. Still, she couldn't ignore the fact that sometimes Ethan's eyes lingered on her longer than they should, as though trying to solve a puzzle he didn't yet have all the pieces to. And just when Amelia thought she was safe, little cracks began to form. She made a passing comment about a painting at a gala, its artist, its history, its placement in a museum abroad. The room fell silent. No one expected a beggar to know such details. Amelia caught herself, masking it with a nervous laugh, but the suspicion had already been planted. Ethan tilted his head, studying her. The family exchanged glances. How could someone from the streets know so much about art, or about wine, or about the nuances of aristocratic etiquette? Amelia's secret was still safe, for now, but with each passing day, her disguise grew thinner, her past threatening to spill into the present. And though Ethan didn't say it out loud, he was beginning to suspect that the woman he had plucked from the pavement was not at all who she claimed to be. The higher Amelia climbed into Ethan's world, the sharper the knives became. Ethan's mother, a woman known for her elegance and influence, never once accepted the story of a beggar suddenly turned companion. To her, Amelia was an intruder, someone who threatened the family's image and legacy. Behind polite smiles and soft-spoken words, she began to dig. Background checks, whispered questions to servants, carefully placed tests meant to expose cracks in Amelia's facade. She would watch her closely at dinners, asking questions with hidden traps, names of cities, stories of culture, knowledge only the well-born could answer without hesitation. Sometimes Amelia deflected gracefully, but other times her answers were too polished, too knowledgeable for a woman who claimed to have slept on the streets. Each slip only deepened Ethan's mother's suspicion, and with every gathering, the pressure around Amelia grew heavier, like invisible walls slowly closing in. Yet Ethan's family was not her only challenge. A rival businessman, one of Ethan's longest and most bitter opponents, saw an opportunity in Amelia's mysterious arrival. To him, the idea of a billionaire bringing home a woman from the streets was not romance, but weakness. Rumors began to spread quietly at first, whispers in boardrooms, subtle comments in the press, suggestions that Ethan's judgment was failing, that love had made him vulnerable. The rival painted Amelia as a distraction, a liability that could cost Ethan contracts, partnerships, and credibility. The more the rumors spread, the more investors and allies began to question Ethan's choices. Amelia could feel the weight of it too, the stares, the gossip, the sense that her presence was not only unwelcome, but dangerous. And though Ethan tried to shield her, she couldn't escape the truth. She had become a target, and every move she made was now ammunition for his enemies. But the greatest threat did not come from Ethan's mother or his rivals. It came from Amelia's past. One evening, as she stepped outside for air during a lavish event, she froze. A familiar voice called her name. Turning, she saw him, her ex-boyfriend. His smirk carried more than recognition, it carried power. He knew who she really was, the life she once lived, the fortune she had walked away from, the secrets she had buried on those streets. He held pieces of it all, and with Ethan's world now intertwined with hers, the risk of exposure was greater than ever. Amelia tried to dismiss him, but he leaned close, whispering threats. He could shatter everything with a single revelation. If Ethan believed him, her carefully constructed disguise would collapse in an instant, and with it, any chance of protecting the truth she had fought so hard to conceal, because what no one knew, not Ethan, not his family, not his rivals, was that Amelia's secret could ruin far more than reputations. It could destroy Ethan's empire, unravel the legacy he had spent years building, and leave both of them broken in ways they could never recover from. The night of revelation came without warning. At a grand charity gala, with chandeliers glittering above, and every eye turned toward Ethan and Amelia, the rival businessman made his move. In front of donors, reporters, and board members, he unveiled a dossier. Photos, documents, fragments of a life Amelia had tried to bury. The crowd gasped as the truth spilled out. Amelia was no beggar. She was the sole heiress to an old family fortune, a legacy so vast it eclipsed even Ethan's. Whispers turned into accusations. Had she deceived him? Was this all a carefully planned manipulation, a scheme to step back into society under the arm of one of its most powerful men? Ethan's chest tightened as he watched the woman he thought he had saved now painted as a liar. In that single moment, admiration turned to doubt, and trust cracked into 1,000 pieces. Ethan confronted her privately, his voice low but heavy with betrayal. He demanded to know why. Why the lies, the disguises, the act of poverty? Amelia's eyes brimmed with tears as she tried to explain. She hadn't sought wealth, she had run from it. Her fortune was not freedom, but a curse tied to betrayal, corruption, and a family that had nearly destroyed her spirit. She fled to escape the suffocating expectations, to find a life untouched by greed or schemes. On the streets, she sought reality, something raw, unfiltered, and painfully human. "I wanted to be seen," she whispered, "for who I am, not for what I own." But Ethan's heart wavered. Was this confession genuine, or another carefully crafted story? He had built his empire on truth and control, and now he felt both slipping from his grasp. To trust Amelia again would mean risking not only his heart, but everything he had built. The revelation tore through the city like wildfire. Headlines screamed from every paper and newsfeed. "Billionaire exposed dating beggar who isn't a beggar at all." Cameras swarmed outside Ethan's mansion, reporters dissected Amelia's past, and talk shows debated whether this was the greatest romance of the year or the most elaborate deception. Every image of them together was replayed, every gesture analyzed, every word scrutinized. For Ethan, the empire he had spent years building suddenly felt fragile, its foundations rattled by whispers of manipulation and scandal. For Amelia, the life she had tried to protect was now twisted into a public spectacle. The world no longer saw her as a woman, but as a story, a contradiction, a mystery, a target of judgment. And in the quiet corners away from the cameras, Ethan and Amelia faced each other not as partners, but as two people caught in a storm neither had planned for. Their clashes became inevitable. Ethan's pride bristled at the idea of being deceived. He demanded answers, his voice edged with anger and hurt. Amelia, in turn, defended herself fiercely, insisting she had never sought to harm him, only to live freely for once in her life. Every conversation circled back to the same wound: trust. Could Ethan believe that her acceptance of his deal had been driven by desperation, not calculation? Could Amelia forgive him for assuming the worst of her the moment her truth was revealed? Between them, love still lingered, undeniable, burning beneath the surface, but it collided with pride, with the fear of betrayal, with the weight of two lives lived under entirely different expectations. Their hearts reached for each other, but their words only pushed them further apart, leaving both wounded, uncertain, and afraid of what tomorrow would bring. And beneath it all lay the moral question that even the public couldn't answer. Had Amelia manipulated Ethan, using his deal as a stepping stone to reclaim her place in society? Or had she simply been protecting herself from the very chains of wealth that had once bound her soul? For every voice calling her a fraud, another called her a survivor. For every critic who accused Ethan of being a fool, another admired him for daring to love across worlds. The truth was messy, complicated, and painfully human, and perhaps that was what made their story so captivating, because no one, not even Ethan or Amelia, could say with certainty who was right and who was wrong. Now, standing at a crossroads, Ethan faced the choice he had been avoiding. His family demanded he end it, reminding him of legacy, reputation, and the empire at stake. Yet his heart whispered something different, that Amelia, with all her flaws and secrets, might be the very thing he had been searching for all along. One path promised stability, approval, and security. The other, risk, scandal, and love that could either save him or break him completely. The world watched, breath held, as Ethan prepared to make a choice that would change both their lives forever. The breaking point arrived in silence. After nights of tension, of whispered arguments and long stares that said more than words, Amelia packed her things. She stood tall, no longer the trembling woman who once sat on a cold pavement with a tin cup. The world now knew who she was, the heiress, the woman who had walked away from wealth to find something real. And as she prepared to leave Ethan's world, she carried herself not with shame, but with pride. For once she was not running, not hiding. She was simply choosing herself. And in that quiet strength, Ethan felt the weight of his pride collapse. He realized that he could lose everything and still rebuild. But if he lost her, he might never find something like her again. The thought of her walking away cut deeper than any scandal, any family disapproval, any loss of reputation. He caught up to her before she reached the door. His voice trembled, not with authority, but with something far more vulnerable. "I don't care if you're poor or richer than me. I just care about you." The words hung in the air, raw, unpolished, and completely true. For a man who had spent his life measuring value in numbers, in contracts, in deals, Ethan had finally spoken from a place beyond calculation. Amelia turned slowly, her eyes searching his face, trying to read the sincerity in his expression. And what she saw was not a billionaire, not a man of power, but a man willing to risk it all for something real. For the first time, she let the weight of his words settle into her heart, but Amelia's response was not the silence of submission. She stepped closer, her voice steady and resolute. "I don't need saving, Ethan. I never did." Her gaze was fierce, her presence unshaken. "If we choose each other, it won't be because you rescued me, or because I filled some role for you. It will be because we both know what it means to love without masks, without conditions." Ethan nodded, his chest tightening as the truth of her words pierced deeper than any accusation ever could. They stood there, two souls stripped of pretense, united not by wealth or desperation, but by the honesty that had nearly destroyed them. And in that fragile, imperfect moment, they chose each other, not as savior and saved, but as equals. Their story did not end with flashing cameras or boardroom victories, but with something quieter, something richer. As they stepped forward together, the world outside still debated their choices, still whispered their names with curiosity and doubt. Yet inside, both knew they had found something rare, something worth more than fortunes or empires. Because sometimes the richest hearts come from the most unexpected places.